morning and welcome to the Point. It is Monday, July 27th, 2020. Thank you to those of you joining us on the GBN Television Facebook page, the Grenada Broadcasting Network's YouTube channel, GBN channel 7, 11 and 20, the website www.gbn.gd, and of course the folks always listening to Classic 105 and Hot 98. This morning we are speaking law. We're speaking with attorney at law, former attorney general, former president of the Bar Association, a lot of titles he has worn over the past years. Mr. Jimmy Bristol is our guest this morning. Morning, Mr. Bristol.
Morning, everybody.
Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to share some knowledge with us and information this morning. Mr. Bristol, initially when we scheduled this program, we really wanted to deal with maritime law, but over the recent days we have been speaking out and hearing about the COVID-19 bill, and I wanted to touch on that before we get into the real reason why we scheduled this program.
Certainly.
Coming from a legal point of view, an attorney at law, what's your take generally on the COVID-19 bill which has been circulating over the weekend?
Well, I got this on the weekend, and I came in early to try and put it in perspective by looking at the Constitution and existing legislation, Public Health Act, the Emergency Powers Act, and to try to understand what the Attorney General and the government is trying to achieve through this bill, and whether, one, it is necessary, and two, whether it is legal in terms of constitutionally valid, because there's been a lot of uproar over the weekend, which resulted in the bill being withdrawn from consideration before Parliament this Wednesday. So people are taking it quite seriously, and it is, my first opinion is it's not necessary, because the Public Health Act already makes provision for dealing with matters such as this coronavirus. So I don't know why we need this big bill. All the Public Health Act requires are regulations to be formulated by the minister and then put into place. So I don't know why we need this big bill. And second point on the bill with regard to some constitutional issues in particular. I'll deal with legality first. Section 5, subsection 5 refers to exemptions granted by the Commissioner of Police under the Emergency Powers Act. Well, there's no such thing under the Emergency Powers Act. That's the first thing. So I don't know how the commissioner is empowered to grant exemptions to people, to travel and so on, or to move around, contrary to any regulations which may be made under this bill if it does become law. So that's one problem. The second really serious problem is Section 6.3, which says if the manager, owner, or other person in charge or employee of any business, establishment, or office aids, abets, or facilitates the contravention of this act, the minister may order the immediate closure of the business for a period not exceeding 3 months without prejudice to any other penalty in law. Now, that's nonsense, because what it is imposing, that subsection, a penalty for breaching the law, and the minister then, judge and jury, imposes the penalty, shutting down your business. Now, a penalty may only be imposed by a court of law pursuant to an offense which has been tried before that court. And in my opinion, this is unconstitutional, as it infringes the separation of powers enshrined in our Constitution. Only a court can impose a penalty, and Section 6.3, in my opinion, constitutes a penalty. So the minister can't just shut down someone's business, because imagine in my office or in GVN, one of your employees didn't wear a mask, then the government just comes in and shuts down your business, So that's not right. There is also I just went through it, the time limits for, I just get it, this flick through, it's quite a lot, the questions of appeal, and one of the people commenting over the weekend raised this issue under Section 17. A person on whom a requirement or restriction is imposed under Section 11 may appeal to a magistrate's court, and the magistrate court may confirm that restriction or quash it. Now, there's several problems here. First, there's no appeal procedure, and in the act, the bill, it doesn't state any grounds for appeal. So it appears to me that what the magistrate is doing is reviewing the decision, and a review of a decision is not within the jurisdiction of the magistrate's court. It's the purview of the High Court. It's what you call judicial review, and that is a power only granted to the High Court. So the magistrate court, in my opinion, has no power authority to exercise the powers purportedly given under Section 17 by way of what is termed an appeal. Additionally, challenges may be made under the Constitution by someone who's detained or whose movement is restricted, and the magistrate's court has no jurisdiction to entertain constitutional issues. Those are solely within the purview of the High Court by virtue of our Constitution. So that's a problematic. We also have the Section 24, which I think a lot of people are worried about, because a police officer may enter any premises without a warrant. That, to me, is not a law that's reasonably required or justified in a democratic society, and therefore falling within any of the exemptions in the Constitution for interference with property or any other rights. But entering a property, your property is inviolable, and a police cannot enter your property without a warrant. And I don't see why, in this case, the power is given to the police to enter your property without a warrant. It doesn't seem to me to be justifiable, that extra power in a democratic society, which is the prerequisites to validity under the Constitution, under the fundamental rights. So I think that's a problem, and that really is not necessary at all. We get to then, within this bill, the government in its wisdom, and I use that with some in inverted commas, inserted the state of emergency declaration powers of the Governor General. And what they did, they took wholesale the provisions from the Emergency Powers Act and pushed them in to this bill. And and again, I say it's not necessary, because we already have the Emergency Powers Act. And if you want to declare a state of emergency, have a state of emergency declared, well then, the power already exists. So I say the act is really not necessary. And then there are sections of it which may be unconstitutional. So that's a brief assessment. I've only studied it in the last hour or so, and I'm not a constitutional expert by any means, but certainly it raises a level of concern. And what it seems to be is it's likely to be open to abuse, given the multitude of powers that could be exercised. And given that governments generally even don't tend not to respect our constitution, which is the highest law of the land, one wonders if they respect the spirit of this proposed bill, which is to protect and to preserve the health of the country. So that's my take on it in a nutshell. I think, and I'm happy that the public pressure came to bear to cause the government to resile from its intention to put this before Parliament on Wednesday. And I think serious discussion or consultation ought now to take place, because the government did not consult the Grenada Bar Association. I do not know if they consulted any stakeholders. And it is a serious bit of proposed legislation and requires serious consultation. And, I don't know what the rush is, because given that the existing laws cater for the current pandemic, why was it necessary to rush this bill, draft it, and rush it to Parliament, where the government, of course, with the majority, will see it through? Unnecessary, in my view, and probably a bit dangerous overall.
As you mentioned, they did not consult, government officials did not consult with the Bar Association before preparing.
That's my information from the president of the Bar Association.
That's
yes.
what I've gotten as well. I've seen I believe two people raising the question, do they need to consult the Bar Association?
Well, they don't need legally.
Right.
But
it is
there's a convention in Grenada and a protocol existing for many years, certainly 30-something years I've been practicing, where consultations are held between the Attorney General's chambers on proposed legislation, more so especially something as impactful as this one. And it's a courtesy, and it shows a level of professionalism. I mean, the Attorney General's role is not just to advise the government. The Attorney General is the defender of the public interest. The Attorney General has a dual role. So, and ought to bear that dual role in mind when putting forward serious bills such as this one. And why not consult, And look at what has happened because of the lack of consultation. It's now withdrawn until that consultation takes place.
Let's hope the consultation takes place.
Well, I hope so. I mean, come on. We this is a serious thing affecting each and everybody. One thing with this epidemic or pandemic, virus, everything, is that no one is escaping its clutches. So everyone is a stakeholder, put it that way, and should therefore have the opportunity to make an input. I don't say necessarily individually, but through representative bodies, Chamber of Commerce, trade unions, Bar Association, etc., teachers, you know what I mean?
All right, let's move on now to the real reason why we scheduled this interview in relation to what I call obstruction of public access to public beaches. Over the past few weeks, we've seen this issue being raised again, the operative word here being again, of members of different communities complaining that their access to public beaches are being obstructed by private companies and organizations. And the biggest question I have is, what are the rights of citizens to access these beaches, and what they need to consider when it comes to private property?
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned private property. There is absolutely no right to cross any private property to access any beach. Full stop. Okay? That may come as a surprise to many people, but that's the law. The beach, for example, if I have bit of land and the well, I won't call it the beach. We use beach in a loose sense. It's the foreshore. The foreshore being that portion of land between the high water mark, well, at high tide, and the sea. So there's a sliver of land along the coast, and it's only a sliver that is the only firm bit of terra firma, firm land that could be considered a beach if it's sandy, or foreshore that is accessible to the public. Because once you get out to the sea, you're on the foreshore, but you can't go above the high water mark if that is someone's property. So even though one may access the beach by a boat, for example, you can be on the beach, but you can't go above onto the person's property. Now, if a person's property is totally surrounds a beach, then there's no right to go through that property to access the beach. Absolutely none.
The argument has been made that I have been using this road or this track for years to get to Blossoms Beach. Since the land has been sold, now you're blocking it off. It is my right to continue using that path.
I don't think so, argument? Because because under the law, a right, which has become what we call in law an easement, a right of way, put it that way, it was called an easement, will only accrue or only be claimable by someone who's been using that road to that beach for 30, 40 years, whatever it may be, if it is directly beneficial to his adjacent land. So I can't leave my village and walk a mile down the road and cross somebody's property for 40 years and say, well, I've been doing it, therefore I have a right. It's not referable. That right is not referable to the use and enjoyment of your property. So that won't work, in my view, as a matter of law. It doesn't give any rights. Unfortunately, in Grenada, we have these misconceptions because for many years, when these issues come up, the actual legal position has not been properly ventilated. But there's no such thing, and then people are being misled as to their rights. You know, and they've been misled, I don't know, because the people should have access. Yeah, but if the government wants to do that, acquire a pathway across someone's land, you can say that's for a public purpose. I'm sure that would be upheld as being constitutionally valid, and then they'll have a right. But other than that, it will be very difficult.
Let's take a quick break and then we're going to come back with the discussion, Mr. Bristol. Right. We're speaking with attorney at law Jimmy Bristol. We started with COVID-19 bill. Now we're on to maritime issues, specifically beach access. We're going to continue the discussion after the break. This is To The Point on GBN Classic Hot 98.
Protect yourself and our community from COVID-19. Wash your hands frequently with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. If soap and water are not available, use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer with at least 70% alcohol. Use a tissue when blowing your nose, sneezing, or coughing. Immediately discard the tissue properly and wash or sanitize your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Let's do our part to ensure that each and every Grenadian remains healthy. To stay up to date, visit the Government of Grenada's webpage or the Ministry of Health's Facebook page. For more information, contact the Ministry of Health's hotline by calling 53-VIRUS. This has been a public service announcement brought to you by the Ministry of Health.
one day I woke up and they painted a set of pedestrian crossing all along the streets. Nobody told us how to use that thing properly.
I know how.
You're serious?
Every safe, good driver knows about these things. As a driver, you have to be very attentive. You're coming up close to a pedestrian cross, you start slowing down immediately, looking to see if there's any pedestrian on the side getting ready to cross. If there is, you stop on the line that is a certain distance before the crosswalk. Then you would see the pedestrian put their hands out, looking directly at you, indicating that they are going to cross. And only when you have come to a complete stop, that is when they will quickly and safely cross to the other side. And then you continue happily on your journey.
Stop, look, hand out, eye contact, wait for pedestrian to cross. Then you happily continue on your journey.
This message is brought to you by this group of insurance companies, the Traffic Advisory Body, and the Traffic Department.
Welcome back to The Point. Our guest this morning, Attorney at Law Jimmy Bristol. We are speaking about maritime issues, specifically access to public beaches, and maybe the COVID-19 bill as we get further into the discussion and when we open the platform for viewers and listeners. Mr. Bristol, let me ask this as well. What are my rights as a citizen to access any public beach that I want? What are my rights?
You have a right to access, let's call it the public beach, but in doing so, you have to respect the proprietary rights or the property rights of any adjacent landowner. So you can get to the beach however you want once you don't trespass in so doing.
Is there a...
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
Is there or what legal avenue can I pursue if I feel like my rights are being infringed upon from accessing Blossoms Beach?
Well, it depends on how that right is being infringed, because if, for example, you approach Blossoms Beach from the sea, or prevented from approaching it from the sea by the owner of the land beyond the beach, above the beach, between the mainland and the sea, then the owner of that land, then that person's got a problem. They can't do that because it's not theirs to stop you going on. You have every right to access from the sea or from adjacent land over which you may have permission to use, or if you own adjacent land and you enter the beach from your adjacent land, then you have every right to be there on that beach. And what is your redress? Your redress is to not to move, and if they push you off physically, well, then take them to court for assault or whatever. But certainly the adjacent landowner or anybody would have no right to remove anyone from any beach, and I use that beach as what we understand it loosely and colloquially, okay? Stand your ground there, you know what I mean?
I agree. There are some property owners which are adjacent to the beaches that follow the rules and their legal right to a T. But then there are others who toe the line, and some go over the line in terms of taking quote-unquote advantage of the property that I own. So my land is adjacent to the beach, but I would set up let's say a cabana or an umbrella beyond my property line. And I'm telling you, you cannot come onto it because that's my property. There are those who say you cannot access the beach at all because it's in front of my property and that is mine. What should be my first course of action as a citizen? Because as Grenadians, our first course of action is to use our tongues and the power of words. But what should be my first course of action there?
Okay, let's split that in two scenarios. One, if I set up an umbrella on a beach, irrespective of if I'm a landowner adjacent or otherwise, just the use of the beach, that is public property. So the only person who could properly complain is the government, because it's their property. Okay? So that's one thing. And the second thing is, if an adjacent landowner, once you don't go on their property that abuts the beach, right? There's going to be a boundary. There's a boundary. And then, use the beach. Use it in a way that's responsible. Use it in a way that doesn't cause a nuisance. I mean, one of the things here, which is quite bad and prevalent, is the noise and the loud music people put on beaches because they think the beach is mine, and really you're not allowed to do that, because apart from the law about the Noise Abatement Act and so forth, as a matter of what we call common law, you shouldn't create a nuisance, and loud noise and littering and all those sorts of things are nuisances, and they affect the enjoyment of the properties of people, of neighboring landowners. So use the beaches by all means, and that's your right, fair enough, but just do so in a respectful manner. The same way you would want people not to come to your house in front and make noise, act in a similar way.
So if the hotel sets up an umbrella on the beach and I am enjoying the shade and security tell me to move, I could tell security public property ease off.
Yeah, because if the sand under the umbrella is the beach, and it is the beach, and it's not that hotel's property. The sand under there is public sand. They want to put it on there. Well, that's okay. A chance that they take, unless they've been given permission to do so. But similarly, putting out deck chairs. I mean, I don't think anybody has a right to put deck chairs on the beach, unless the government gives their consent. And I know the government has tacitly gives consent for that sort of thing. But it doesn't mean you can go and sit on the chair, because that chair actually belongs to someone else. So you're trespassing by sitting on that chair. You're not trespassing on the property being the beach, but you're trespassing on the property being the chair.
Okay. Lord, the technical.
But when you sit on the sand under the umbrella, you're not trespassing on any property, because you're not sitting on the umbrella. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, you understand.
All
yeah.
Right.
So you can. I mean, but the thing is, I think overall it's called wisdom and common sense by all concerned people. You know what I mean? And that's how society has to function. And so, there's got to be a lot of live and let live, because if some property owners really, let us say, insist on the strict legal rights, you may find that the actual width of the beach, which is going to be much smaller than that lovely sand that you see, it doesn't encompass all the sand, because the high water mark, which may form the boundary, may be quite close to the water. So you may only have a foot or two width of beach. You understand? I haven't seen anyone doing that, but the same way that when you go to enjoy the beach, you don't go up into the property proper, or don't make a lot of noise and so forth.
There's a question on the Facebook that I find to be a very good question. Is there a law when selling land adjacent to beaches that an allowed road must be made available?
No, absolutely not. There's no such law. I know Barbados has that law, because I was working there some years ago, and a friend, he owned a hotel, and there's the access. He said, yes, we have to put those in, but we don't have that. We don't have that at all. I know here certain landowners have put in access ways to the foreshore, the beach, the waterside, even though it's not required. And that is what I would call, again, consideration. And that person or those people thought about it. And it's fair for Grenadians or anyone here to have a right to go down to the foreshore, and they've done that. But if there isn't that pathway, if the owner of that land doesn't allow you to access the beach through their property, there's nothing you can really do.
Shouldn't that be something we put into law? Because right now we are selling out a lot of land surrounding our beaches.
Yeah. It could be, and I don't know if it could be. There'll be some constitutional issue about, because it may be a deprivation of property, so there may have to be some compensation from the government if you're going to have to do that. But certainly, it's doable, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. The only thing I fear is that the abuse of the access. You have, you know what people are like, the garbage they leave behind, and you see it all the time, and then they get onto the beach and leave a mess and make a lot of noise. I mean, I see it all the time, and that is a problem. So maybe it's a reason why certain people guard their property rights jealously, because they know what's going to happen if Tom, Dick, and Harry and the whole world descends on a beach in front of their property. What will happen? So we have, as the public, we've got to take responsibility for our actions and how we utilize public property, not just beaches, but generally, you know.
Agreed. All right. In this part of the program, we're going to open the phone lines and the platform for our viewers. The phones have already been ringing. For our viewers and listeners who may have questions for Mr. Bristol in relation to public access to public beaches and possibly the COVID-19 control bill, please keep in mind that, as Mr. Bristol said, only this morning he read through it. So, let's be a little mindful of the questions we may pose in relation to that bill specifically. So let's go to our first caller. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, my dear. How are you today?
I'm good.
Mr. Bristol, knowing that the Attorney General knows what is actually in the Constitution of Grenada, then why he is trying to slip in those cheap shots in this current bill which they were trying to pass? What is the whole reason then? Knowing well what is the law already, then why this statement have to be made in this bill which they were going to pass on Wednesday?
Thank you, caller.
The AG and the government, that I don't know why they did it, but when I look at it, and I'm sure lots of people have looked at it, and that's why there was this big uproar over the weekend. They're asking the same question. And I think he's the only one who could answer that, he and the powers that be, because they took a decision and they've deemed to know the law. They may not know every word, but you deem to know it. And especially in a position as an Attorney General, you ought to be aware in such a controversial topic, subject matter. More so, read a lot and see what the pitfalls are and where you're allowed to go legally, what road you're allowed to take. So it's given the presumed knowledge and expertise, one does have to query why the government, because it's the executive who's pushing it, would want to pursue this path. Because, one may be an attorney general or one may be a lawyer for a client. I mean, the government is the attorney general's client in this case, but they don't have to accept your advice. So he may very well have given advice and it may not have been accepted. So we don't know the actual answer. But it's not a healthy situation.
Let's go back to the phone line. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Citizen Welsh. Greetings and greetings to your guest. Listen, Mr. Bristol, you can't blame the so-called Attorney General. He would have known. They would have known, and they would have done Attorney General, So you can't blame him. Hear this, Mr. Bristol. Relative to the access to our beaches, beachfront property in this here country, I heard you crystal clear, and believe you me, I never knew it, because since I was a boy, I was able to walk onto all the beaches, whether I be Fort Judy, Calvini, Wester Hall, wherever. But now we've been told that there is no law there that gives the people of this here country access to the beachfront. No, you would understand, Mr. Bristol, why I claim and insist that this country has to be reconstituted to give the people of this here country ownership of this here country instead of being ruled under this colonial constitution. You understand that? If I don't know if you wish to comment on it, have a nice day, will you?
Thank you, Citizen Rollo.
Good to hear from you again. I don't think it's really a question of a colonial constitution. It's a question of putting the laws in place, and that could be done. It just, there are ways and means of achieving objectives like this. And but on the other hand, you say about the beaches, but what about the rights of landowners not to have people traipsing all over their property? So you have to come up with a solution. But there are solutions, so it's not something that cannot be addressed.
There's a question on the Facebook that is asking, yesterday another attorney made a comment on another program that the position of Governor General is a ceremony appointed position. Can you explain what that means?
No, it's not a ceremonial position. The Governor General under the Constitution represents Her Majesty the Queen. And I think the reason that person may be saying so is because, generally speaking, the Governor General, subject to exceptions, acts on the advice of Cabinet, as stated in the Constitution. I think it's section 62. So almost rubber stamping things, in essence. So from that point of view, yes, but the Governor General's status is a constitutional position as the representative of Her Majesty the Queen.
A WhatsApp question. Somebody's asking, well, they say they need to know if the powers given to the police in the COVID-19 control bill are for matters pertaining to COVID-19, or is it general powers to deal with any situation pertaining to their job as officers?
No, it's COVID-19. I've read through. Yeah, it's limited to COVID-19.
And I think that's one of the things a lot of people did not grasp, that the bill was specific to containing COVID-19 and not just any and every situation.
Yeah, it is geared to that. And if the powers are exercised without the aims and objectives of that act as the main reason for the exercise of those powers, then that could be illegal, and subject to redress in the court.
Let's go back to the phone line. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Alexis. How are you doing today?
Morning, I'm good. Go ahead.
Okay. Question for Mr. Bristol. Hold on. From where I am, there's a lot of noise.
Yeah, I realize.
Look, I did not hear Mr. Bristol from the onset, but having heard him for the last few moments, I have a question and some concerns. This has been an eye-opener for me, okay? Mr. Bristol, disclosure this morning. And my question is, this problem we have with the beach or beaches has been around for a number of years. I recall the first time I happened to know about that, the problems with the beach was in the days of Beach Hotel. Mr. Derek Knight, who is now deceased, and I think he went along and broke down some barriers and so on. Now, since this problem has been around for all of these years, Mr. Bristol, do you think it is necessary now that the government take a lead and advise the cities in regards to what our responsibilities or obligations are regarding these beaches and accessing the beaches? It looks to me as though this is going to be an ongoing issue with the lands that are being now put in the hands, whether they are foreigners or private persons. Do you think that there's a need to do something about it, and at least, most importantly, to prepare some legislation or to put some legislation in place that would guide the citizenry? Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Mr. Bristol?
Certainty is always a good thing. And right now there's a lot of uncertainty, both in the minds of landowners and in the minds of the public at large about accessing beaches. Now, I understand quite readily, and I'm willing to understand the desire to access the beach. So recreation is great, we'll have great fun. And therefore, and I understand the need for landowners to have their property protected. The solution, I think, is to look at a law that will allow for access to the foreshore. But how you do it, you have to define a beach, because if a man has 10 acres of land bordering the foreshore and there's no beach, it's rocky, do you have to provide access to the rock? What is it you're saying? Or is it that you identify certain beaches, like you have Grand Ancestor Beach, you have Black Bay, you have Mon Rouge Beach, etc., etc., etc. You identify places and say, these beaches, access shall be, But the thing again is, if these beaches, if the land is already in private ownership, you would then have to the government would have to acquire a strip to allow people to walk. I think it has to be walking, because if you have cars, then you're going to block the driveway. But nevertheless, you can cross that bridge. You can have a defined access, but you'll have to acquire the land from the landowner or landowners. It's feasible, But I think there should be consultation too with landowners. For example, you don't want people walking through an industrial operation which poses danger to physical danger. If you're accessing, you want to be like between adjacent properties or on just outside the boundary of the sphere of operation of any industrial entity, that sort of thing. If you're at a hotel, you don't want to access through the middle of a hotel, but along the boundary, something like that. I mean, I know down at not Grooms Beach, the one next door where the beach house was, there is an access belonging to the government to the beach. That's defined. And so there are ways and means of doing it. And I think it would, once and for all, clarify it if it's done properly. You understand? But it must be done properly. And concomitant with the access, there must also be rules and regulations as to conduct. In terms, I guess the existing laws may help, because we have litter laws, we have noise laws, but people have to understand you can't just do a bathway on every beach, just because it happens to be the beach. But it's the norm in Grenada to abuse these rights and privileges, and we have to learn to be a little more disciplined.
I agree with that part 100%. Let's go back to the phone lines. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, Blossom. Good morning, Mr. Bristol. I want to take ourselves back to the early 1950s when Sir Eric Matthew Gary was PM, actually. We had a situation in Bathway where actually the owners of lands around there, Kent Estates, tried to prevent people from going on the beach. They had actually put barbed wires around to prevent people. And Sir Eric Matthew Gary took up the matter, actually, whereby he asked the people of River Sally and Rose Hill to tear down whatever barricade was put up, actually. And that was done. And his thing was that no one would prevent these people from accessing the beaches of Grenada, because throughout Grenada the beaches are free. And it was done. And Kent State never actually, tried to do that again. In fact, what I'm telling you is facts, actually, because my mother was involved in that. I can recall that clearly. I was only a little boy then, but but that they tried that, and they were not allowed to carry on. So he said that in law in Grenada, actually, this is it. Grenadians are free to access any beach in Grenada, and he was not going to tolerate that. So I think it has to do with the will of the government, the administration, if they want to do that. I think it's necessary because we are the owners of the beaches around the island.
Thank you, caller.
But let me just deal with that thing. You were small when you know a lot of people in Grenada like to make comments and they don't know the facts. I never comment on anything. I never render an opinion unless I know the facts. I'm not reading Facebook. I don't even know what it is. I'm not listening to gossip. I'm not reading newspapers. I'm not listening to the news. I want the facts. You were a little boy, so you don't know the facts. That's the first thing. And Gary saying that the access to the beach is ours and is our right doesn't make it law. That's the second point. The third point, I remember when Mr. Kent, the last one who was there, I can't remember his name now, Edward Kent, put some telephone poles down in the ground between the Bathway Road and the beach at Leverard. That was quite recently, and in the last 20 years. And the reason he did that was to stop people taking their trucks and backhoes on the beach and digging out the sand to build a house, right? That's why he did it. There was a big uproar and politicians got involved. Instead of the politicians educating the people, one, it didn't stop access to the beach because you could walk around and through because there was space to the beach. You just didn't want the vehicles going down there to destroy our beach, my beach and your fellow citizens' beach through their selfish acts as sand mining. That is what he tried to do. In fact, if you knew the facts, so that didn't want any public pressure, Mr. Kent actually gave hundreds of acres of land to the government for the people up there, for their recreation, So as I said, you were a little boy and you probably didn't know the facts.
There is a WhatsApp question. Can the PM call a state of emergency or the Governor General? Because we have seen the Prime Minister call it and the GG signed off on it. Is this a violation of our Constitution?
The Governor General issues a proclamation, but I believe under the Constitution that the Governor General acts on the advice of Cabinet. I've seen commentary, it seems to have come from another lawyer on WhatsApp, came in yesterday saying, well, no, the Governor General must exercise that decision in her own deliberate judgment. But I don't agree with that reading the Constitution. I may be wrong, but prima facie, I don't agree with it. I think it's the Cabinet, which means the Prime Minister and his colleagues in Cabinet, the ones who would direct the Governor General as to when and how to issue the proclamation.
Another WhatsApp question. If there's a private establishment on the beachfront, how many feet of the shoreline is rightfully theirs?
It depends on their boundary. In law, if a property is described as being bound by the sea, so you get these old title deeds, we had it in Grenada, we say all that property bound on one side by the land of Mr. Blossom, on the second side by the land of Mr. Smith, and on the other side by the sea. That means it is bound by the high water mark. It doesn't encompass the land between the high water mark and the actual seawater. So that is where you go. But some people, many people actually, have been erecting businesses on our beach, on my beach. And nobody says a word about that. I haven't heard any, but I've seen it. And I guess because it might be a small man, nobody says anything, but there we go. Nobody has a right, unless the government allows it, to put any structure on any beach. But many people do get away with it.
Unfortunately.
Or permitted to do so.
unfortunately. Let's go back to the phone line. Good morning, caller.
Good morning. I think this is quite an eye-opener this morning in light of the fact that for years we have heard, I think it was Gabi that sang about Jar Beach's Mine. Then we had Chocolate talking about the beaches, singing about the beaches years ago. And in light of the Lord Brownlow issue in the 1970s. So I think we came to accept that access to the beach was almost universal in Grenada as far as concerned. So, I mean, this, I think we need to be educated on that. And secondly, the fact that I think you said that the AG is principal legal advisor to the government, but also he's charged with the responsibility of the citizens' rights. So if he were to draft a bill like this, can the citizens not take him to court for abdicating responsibility? Thank you.
Thank you, caller.
I'll take the last point, your second point. No, how you challenge the law is through the courts, by challenging the validity of the law, whether it's constitutional or otherwise, and that's what you do. That's what the court is there for. And on the first point is the beaches. The problem is people act on emotion. They act with a lack of knowledge, and in many cases they're encouraged by the political directorate. With Brownlow, it was politics and the force of people, and Brownlow probably wasn't smart to allow an access because he had the entire beachfront, I think, was his. But so there are ways of, in many ways to skin a cat. But we must always act with knowledge and in wisdom. Flying off with shouting and insults and so forth, it doesn't get you anywhere. It just shows how ignorant you are. Say, look, what is the position? This is the position. Knowing the position, what can we do about it? What is the solution? And let's work towards it. It's very easy.
And let me ask this question. In a conversation I had with some young activists this morning, it was pointed out that the Constitution states that a state of emergency shall be in place for no longer than 6 months. But the COVID-19 bill was, if and when it goes to Parliament, will be enacted for a state of for a length of a year. Can that be done?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you see, the bill does not create a state of emergency, and it's not pursuant to any state of emergency. The functions of the various government agencies under the bill are not functions under a state of emergency. They're simply functions under that bill. For example, under the Public Health Act, you have similar powers to close businesses, to control the movement of people. That's completed without a state of emergency. I don't think we need a state of emergency to be in place in order to effectively or control the spread, or to put mechanisms in place to control the spread of coronavirus, because the Public Health Act is there and you don't need a state of emergency. The state of emergency is really designed when there's public disorder, breakdown of law and order, and sedition. It is not designed for a health crisis. It's being misused, in my view, because when you look at Section 14 of the Constitution, which refers back to a state of emergency and says any law pursuant to state of emergency which infringes your freedom of movement, freedom of association, I think it was in Section 3 of the Constitution, that law will be valid. So and the state of emergency, the Emergency Powers Act, which in my view is the act that goes hand in hand with the state of emergency, speaks about taking people into custody and so forth, and having a tribunal set up under the Constitution to determine if their custody is being lawful. These state of emergency are to do with personal freedom and incarceration, but not a health issue like this. I think from the off, the government went down the wrong track and declared a state of emergency. I don't think Barbados did. I'm sure some of the other islands didn't. There's no need for state of emergency, in my view.
As we wrap up this morning, Mr. Bristol, any final thoughts on either issue, the COVID bill, or access to public beaches?
Well, what I would like to get across to the public at large is this: on either issue, get educated, get as much knowledge before speaking. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry.
I like that. I like that final thought. Thank you very much, Mr. Bristol.
That is from the Bible.
Thank you very much for being our guest, and thank you for sharing some knowledge with us this morning. Appreciate it on both issues.
Absolute pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Bye.
Stay safe.
You too.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Attorney at law Jimmy Bristol, our guest this morning, former AG, former president of the Grenada Bar Association. We thank him very much. He's also versed in maritime law and various other laws as well. And we thank him for sharing an hour of his time today with us. That will be the end of the program and the end of my time here on Classic and Hot 98 and GBN. Have yourselves a productive Monday. Be safe. Like Mr. Bristol said, educate yourselves on various things that would affect you and your family and loved ones. Joseph is up next with Mid-Morning Buzz. Have yourselves a good Monday.
Are you looking?